Welcome to Punch Keys Podcast. I'm Poppy Minix, your co-host, bringing you blunt talk for the fiction novelist.
And I'm Cascade, your other writerly co-host. If you love to ramble about writing and need a tribe, you found us.
Are you ready? We're uncorking now. Let's talk about punching those keys.
Poppy, guess what time it is?
It is obviously amazing Punch Keys podcast time.
Yeah,
Yay!
best time of the week.
Yeah.
We are super pumped, as always, because we have a guest interview.
Yay!
I'm really, really excited for this guest interview. I think partly because of his experience and the depth of different mediums he's written in. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of material to cover. I have a guest here who has done, obviously, the big one that everyone always talks about, traditional publishing versus self-publishing. Mm-hmm. He's written nonfiction and fiction. He has a journalistic flair in all of his stuff that I've noticed. So we want to talk about that. He's done magazine writing. He's done blogging. He's done starting his own companies. There's like so many great things we're going to talk about. So we would like to welcome Paul Bradly Carr.
Hello. I'm exhausted hearing you just listing the things I've done. I need a nap after that. It made me feel very old and very tired. So thank you.
Well, I can't help that. So age is age. But yes. I think experience is, you've got it in spades. I'm really excited to sit down and talk about all of this.
And I'm excited to be here with you both. So thank you for having me. It's very kind.
No problem. So I did kind of want to start. I know all of this stuff about you, obviously, because I have researched you. I actually found Paul through a Readsy Zoom session they did for authors, and he was specifically talking about traditional versus self-publishing. And so it was a fantastic talk that he did. And then I researched it and I'm like, man, this guy has done so much. But for our listeners who may not have researched you as thoroughly as I have, can you give us a little Cliff Notes version of your writing career?
Yes. So I started out as a columnist and a journalist for The Guardian back in London. When I was very young, I think I wrote my first column for them when I was 19 years old, because this was back when the internet was this shiny new thing, or at least for most traditional publications it was. And so they needed a 19-year-old to tell them what was what. So that was the beginning. Then I wrote various books about the internet and my adventures therein. And then I was at TechCrunch at Pando in Silicon Valley, writing about tech billionaires and the terrible things they do and how they're destroying the world. And I've written books about my adventures around those people and trying to become rich myself as an entrepreneur. I've also written about how much drinking was involved around that. I've written books about my sort of drunken adventures and then eventual sobriety. Yeah, I ran a magazine in Las Vegas, which was somewhat nuts, publishing company in the UK. It's quite a long Cliff Notes, but now I've just written my first novel, which is based in that awful Silicon Valley I just mentioned. It's a murder mystery about somebody who's trying to kill all the terrible people, and a protagonist who's quite keen for them to succeed. It turns out. So that's me.
I couldn't help but laugh when I was looking at your book coming out, 1414, and the description of what it's about. When is the actual release date for that?
October 11th.
Yay. October 11th.
Yes.
Okay. So that is already out then for us, since we have pre-recorded.
Yes, it's doing incredibly well.
Doing incredibly well.
Incredible. I can't believe what happened the first week it came out, especially with everything that was in the news that week. It's really astonishing. I mean, it's who could have expected any of it?
It's true.
I had a good chuckle when I was reading where the book was set and the protagonist's mind, because I was like, oh, wow, this is like, I just got done studying all of the pieces and memoirs that you have written. I'm like, he's definitely still speaking from the heart, even though he's writing fiction now. What made you choose a female protagonist?
A couple of things. So first of all, it's a story about how Silicon Valley is just incredibly toxic. And I say this not as somebody, a lot of people say that, like, oh, Facebook's terrible. I've been covering this shit for 20 something years. And I know these people, some of them have given me money to start companies. So trust me when I say it's toxic. And trust me when I say it's particularly toxic if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you're basically anything other than a straight white cisgendered man, you're going to struggle in Silicon Valley, both behind the scenes and in front of them. So it struck me, the idea of having a cisgender white man as the protagonist didn't really make a huge amount of sense. But also part of it was, I've written memoirs about hapless white guy going through the world, getting drunk and getting away with it. That was me. And I wanted, when I was moving to fiction, to write something different. I think a lot of people, when they switch from especially journalism to fiction, their protagonist is always basically themselves, but just with a fake name. Like, I think people, when they make that switch from nonfiction to fiction, put those sort of training wheels on of going, right, I'm going to write first person, I'm going to write a protagonist who's basically me wearing a slightly different hat. And I just knew that the challenge of writing fiction was going to be so difficult anyway, that I wasn't going to cheat in that way. So I knew I wanted to write a protagonist who wasn't anything like me. But then as I was sort of writing the story, it was so obvious it needed to be a female protagonist that you couldn't tell a story of how bad this shit is. Because it's the same as, it's kind of a weird analogy, but it's the same as when you talk to men about, like harassment in the street or whatever. And we just kind of go, I've never seen that happen. It's like, men don't see things that women see. So all the women I'd spoken to in Silicon Valley told me these horrific stories that as a man, it's like, I never saw that. And so again, having a male protagonist, it just doesn't make sense if you're writing about that terrible stuff. But it was then incredibly difficult because I'm not, I was learning how to write fiction as I kind of went along, but also, there is that huge danger that you end up writing these terrible characters who, as in terribly written characters, because you're a man trying to write women, and there are literally entire subreddits dedicated to how bad that can go. So I just basically wanted to make it almost impossible to succeed, I think is what I'm trying to say. And hopefully I succeeded in not succeeding in succeeding. Anyway, hopefully I was heartened to see the reviews were not terrible on that front. So
No,
I think I just about got away with it.
Yes.
I think you did. What type of research did you do in that aspect? Because I think it's applicable not just in a man writing a female, but anyone who's writing a character. And I'll point, everyone should be writing a character that is different from themselves.
Yes.
So what kind of research on top of your experiences did you do for that?
Well, so as I said, it's helpful that I've spent 20 something years in Silicon Valley, and I've spoken to, I have met, I have sources and countless people who are not like me who tell me stories, and I also am involved in co-running a site called Chairman Mom, which is with my girlfriend Sarah, who it's a site for working parents, particularly working moms. For networking and things like that. So I spend half my life hearing these stories and just being constantly kind of stunned by the sort of experience of women in the workplace, etc. So I've kind of absorbed a lot of it. So I'm starting out from a position of not entirely stupid, but then it's a lot of just talking and talking and talking to people and saying, does this reflect your experience? And having people read pages and pages and just saying, tell me every bit of this that makes you go, when you read it, or go, well, no. Like, it's just a question of giving people pages and listening to everything they say, and just starting from the point of view of assuming that you are going to get it wrong. And it's a bit like when I see people writing about Silicon Valley from outside it, I have that same sort of cringe moment of like, you just don't fundamentally understand this. You're talking at it from the point of view of an outsider trying to understand this thing that's taken me 20 years to understand. I'm very sort of cognizant. I'm talking to people who have spent a lifetime living this, and they know it infinitely better than I do. So it's share the pages, listen to the feedback, and just try your best to not like smack yourself in the face with a rake on every page, basically. So, it's research and trial and error and getting a lot of feedback and trying to correct the cluelessness out of the manuscript at every turn.
Would you give any advice to someone who, I see it all the time, writers are hesitant or they're unsure of where to find these people to put their pages in front of when they want sensitivity readers, when they want double checks on stuff? You're in an environment where they were just naturally there for you. Did you have to go to any extra effort to find those sensitivity readers?
So I think there's two things. I think sensitivity readers are fantastic, both conceptually and in actual fact. As a default versus a thing that only some authors understood was important. The fact that now most authors at least understand there are sensitivity readers out there if they want them, I think is a great stride forward, the sort of normalization of that. I think if you don't have any people in your world who are like the characters you're writing, then there's probably something wrong with your world, and I would work on that first. Like if you're like, I don't know any women, I don't know any people of color. It's like, You need to fix your fucking friends before you write any more books. That's a fundamental problem. And I would suggest don't write characters you have never encountered. Like that's a very dangerous world. So I would hope most people have in their world people who they can say, can you read this and be brutally honest with me? Otherwise, again, the problem is not your writing, it's your life. But so, some combination, I think, of making sure you have a wider range of friends and lived experience, and you talk to people and then on top of that, going to professional sensitivity readers as required to say, okay, as somebody who doesn't know me at all, who's coming to this cold, can you're reading this and giving me a professional opinion? Because you can, even if you think, I know a bunch of women, it's a big category, so I think a combination of both, but hopefully most people writing who consider themselves authors have spent their entire life trying to surround themselves with interesting, diverse people. Otherwise, I can't really help you. Sorry.
Fair.
Yeah.
So you picked a setting that you're obviously really familiar with. You've chosen to do a female protagonist. So what drew you to murder mystery? Is that something you love to read? Where did that come in?
Yeah, I always knew if I ever was going to write fiction. And by the way, I'm 41. I started writing this book about 6 years ago, and I spent up until that point convinced I could never write fiction. So, but I just thought I can't do this because it's a totally different skill than writing nonfiction, and it is much, much harder. I know I can write a sentence, and I know I can write a paragraph in a book, but I went out into the world, had crazy adventures, and I wrote about them. That's great because as long as you write accurately, nobody's ever sitting there going, that just doesn't seem believable. It's like, well, tough shit, I was there. I have photos. And so the whole narrative arc, hopefully it makes sense and is satisfying. But if it happened that way, it happened that way. And so there's a lot of the craft of storytelling that you don't need to be a master of in order to write good nonfiction, because as long as it happened that way, you can tell it that way. As long as you write a sentence and make people laugh or cry or whatever it is that you want to do. With fiction, so a very concrete example is if I wrote about Silicon Valley billionaires as I know them in nonfiction, then people would go, this is weird, but I guess that's how it is. When you write about those same people in fiction, people say, I don't believe those people exist. These are unbelievable characters. These are not three-dimensional. They're totally irredeemable. I'm joking, but I'm not. It's like so many of these people, and I know them well, are two-dimensional characters. They are very, very, their emotional core is just missing, which is, by the way, how they became billionaires in the first place. Because when you and I would have said, this seems a little bit unethical, or I'm going to pause before I do this, they just plow on through. And so to us as, empathetic beings, we're like, I don't understand how they can be so sociopathic. If you write them in fiction, you have to explain that, or they have to, at their core, actually be, the heroes of their own story and all that stuff. So it's much harder to create fictional characters because they have to be, if not redeemable, at least understandable. And also then the story has to make sense. And I'm not the first author to say, the trouble with fiction is it has to make sense, whereas nonfiction doesn't. So I just knew I just can't do that. I cannot create out of whole cloth these characters, these stories. And to answer your question, I love murder mysteries. I'm obsessed with them. The more complex, the better. And I mean that in the sense of plot, not character, although obviously I love complex characters. I'm a big fan of locked room mysteries, and I mean locked room in the purest sense of this murder could not possibly have existed. Impossible crimes, not what it's kind of become, which is anyone who's in a closed environment, that's a locked room mystery. No, I love the ones where it's like, that could not have happened. And so incredibly complex plots. And it's just like, if I ever wrote a novel, I'd want to write something that complex. And I'm just not that clever. I'm just not that good at it. And so I just ran away from it. And then when I finally decided I was going to write this book, it had to be mystery. It just had to be. It was the only murder mystery is my favorite genre. I knew I wasn't going to write a literary novel, which is, where nothing really happens, but it makes you cry. That's just not me. It's not that I'm not good at it. I can't comprehend how to do that. Whereas murder mysteries, I tear through them. So that was a long answer to a short question. Sorry.
No, that's perfect.
Wonderful.
That's what I wanted. So obviously reading the genre you write is a huge thing. Everyone's going to say that. So you've read a bunch of them, you love them, you get the feel and pacing for them. Did you look into any type of plotting formats or mystery plot beats or you just went from the natural flow from reading so many? What was your process?
Yeah, I think same when I wrote my first memoir, is I read the genre, particularly murder mysteries, I've read the genre like inside out. But I still tried at the beginning to be like, well, I should treat this like a professional thing. And so I bought all the books, like that are about plot beats and different act structures and stuff. And I just sort of thought, this is way too complicated. It's like math. I'm not very good at math. I'm good at words. And this just all seems incredibly complicated. So I just tried then instead to write a story as I knew they were. I just have this sort of innate sense of how murder mystery works. I will say, though, I did work with a story coach, Lisa Cron, who wrote Wired for Story and various other books, who, because I needed somebody who would at least make sure I wasn't, as I said before, hitting myself in the face with a rake every so often, who, helped me a lot when I was going off course. But in terms of like the structures and the sort of all those books on like how to write a mystery, and they break it down so granularly. I read them all, but I don't think I understood them. I just went back to writing a book like I wanted to read. I know, how a murder mystery works. There's protagonists and crimes and antagonists and a reveal and that stuff. So, and twists, obviously. So I just wrote it and then had a writing coach who every so often went, well, this is a waste of a chapter. Why does this exist? And I would just take it out and carry on. And would also help me with characterization and the stuff that isn't plot. I feel like with plot, I'm off to the races. But when it comes to like making sure that the emotional core is there, I needed a lot more of that than I did how to write a murder mystery.
So you hired a book coach. I don't know if you hired sensitivity readers, if it was just people you knew in your life, or a mixture of both. But I was really impressed when you were talking about self-publishing versus traditional publishing, how you're approaching self-publishing. You are approaching it as a startup business. You spoke in there about how you have to have capital to start it. So what are the things that you felt were essential to invest in besides a book coach?
So that's actually a separate thing. So the book coach came way before I decided how I was going to publish it. The book coach came because I read Wired for Story. I loved it. And I emailed Lisa and said, I've written a draft of a novel and I think it's good, but I have no idea. Do you by any chance do coaching? And she was like, yes, that's what I do. So I started working with Lisa 4 years ago, and with no real even a feeling whether I was even going to publish the thing. So whether you invest in a book coach, a story coach or not, has for me nothing to do with self-publishing. Self-publishing, though, yeah, I don't know how much you want me to get into the why I self-publish, but in terms of investment, I'm very lucky. I'm privileged to have the sort of access to some money that I can use to pay for a developmental editor, which, by the way, is the number one thing I would say everyone should spend money on. If once you've written your story, even if you think it's gold, having a developmental editor who has that detachment, who can talk to you about structure, who can say what's working and pacing and plot and things like that, was the best expense. You can almost get away with anything else. But the second thing I would say is then a good copy editor who will save you from yourself, because you can write a great book, but if it's got typos in it, people think you're a chump and they'll stop reading because it rips you out the story. So I guess my two would be that. And then my third would be a cover designer, because obviously that's what sells the book, but also it's what flags that a book is a real thing versus something you just made on your computer or put on the Kindle.
And you started, before you said that, you asked if we wanted to know why you went self-publishing, and I absolutely want to know why. Please tell me.
So the exact opposite reason, I think, from where most, well, no, I don't know. I can't generalize why most do. But for me, it was very much a choice that I've been in Silicon Valley a long time, as a writer mostly, but also I've been around startups. And the publishing industry just baffles me. And I say this as someone who used to be a publisher. Like, the timelines in publishing are just insane. That you can have a book that, you've already spent 5 years on. It'll then take you, 6 months to find an agent, 6 more months before it's even out on submission. And then I always laugh when I see people on Twitter saying, great, my book is coming out, pre-order my book, it's out in like 20 million years. And you just think, Christ, this is a slow industry. And, I'm writing a book about technology that in 4 years, I'm going to have to rewrite the thing. Like, it's just baffling to me, the timelines of publishing. So for me, it was this thing of, I've written the book I want to write. It is going to upset a lot of quite rich people, which means I'm going to have a lot of lawyers from publishers saying to me, this bit where you say that Uber is a terrible company, can we not have that? Because they have billions of dollars and we're a publishing company. I have a quote at the beginning of the book from there was an Uber executive who threatened to spend $1 million to go after my girlfriend and our family. And I felt very strongly I wanted that quote in the front of the book. There is no fucking way on earth HarperCollins is letting me put that quote in the front of my book without the permission of the sociopath. Can we get the sociopaths a permission? So for me, it was like, I want to write the book I want to write. Also, I have an audience. I've built over 10, 20 years writing about technology. I have this huge audience of people who are people in and around the technology industry who on paper do not read books. Like, they probably buy one novel a decade, but they will buy this fucking novel. And so for me, it was like, I have this weird audience that doesn't necessarily overlap with where publishers will focus their attention on selling a book. I have a book that publishers will want to change. I just know it, having been one. I also have a book that I would like to see out in the world in less than 27,000 years. There's something just conceptually for me, because I've been so spoiled to be in Silicon Valley, where if you have an idea, you can just do it and see if people like it. There's this conceptual problem I have with trying to find an agent who will tell me that the book is good enough to sell to a publisher who then has to give their stamp to say it's a real book before it gets through the marketing and all the rest of it. I know I have an audience. I know I can sell it. I am lucky to have the resources to do it, and I can do it quickly and well. And knock on wood, the early reviews have kind of borne out the fact that there is a readership out there for it. I think the book looks good, but again, there's a lot of privilege stacked into everything I just said in terms of I have the resources. I used to be a publisher, so I know how to make a book. This is going to sound like a terrible name drop, but I'm trying to use it to illustrate my privilege here. I put on Goodreads, I jokingly reviewed my own book on Goodreads and it says, author review. I'm not trying to scam anyone. And I gave it 5 stars and said, this is the best book I've written this year.
I saw that.
But the first person to respond was Otis Chandler, who's the co-founder of Goodreads. So it's like, I'm coming at this from such enormous privilege and such enormous, that my advice to others on why they should self-publish is, I always wrestle with that. I always wrestle with, in the same way as I say to people, if you have a great idea for a tech company, you should just, start it, raise some money from friends and family and start it. Because if people like it, they'll come. The amount of privilege built into that sentence is just so ridiculous that it's difficult for me to divorce the privilege from the practicality. That having been said, there are many ways to self-publish a book that do not require any of that stuff. There are people who are teenagers who are putting books out, who are writing through Wattpad and other platforms, who are then putting their book out on the Kindle, having written it on their phones. Like, if you are a good storyteller, people will find you, but it helps to be enormously privileged. Unfortunately, like with everything else, there's a reason why so many successful indie filmmakers also happen to have rich parents. Like, it's, I don't have rich parents. I just happen to have spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley. And so, sort of money falls around and you sort of catch some of it out the air sometimes.
Out the air.
And if I can use it to write books, so much the better.
Yes.
Okay, so this is really interesting to me because you also have an 8-week course that helps people with self-publishing, correct?
Yes.
How old is that? When did you start?
How old is it? It started a week ago. It started last week. I've never taught anything. I'm not a coach. Like, I am, as you can tell by the fact I can't give a short answer to a fucking simple question. I am a terrible teacher. But
it makes you a better person to interview. Trust me, it's good.
Well, good luck with the edits. But it was the thing where I've spent so much time with people asking me for advice. And you just asked me, why did you self-publish? And my answers are always very well, when I did it, I had all these, advantages. And I wanted to go back and actually think about what advice can I give people who are not as privileged as me? How can I take all the privilege I have and give it to other people through advice, through sort of one-on-one, even, we do these weekly office hours where I say, I'll introduce you to people I know. So much of it is network. But mostly it was Sarah, my girlfriend, who was like, you should do a course, and I said, we started this platform together for working parents, and part of it has a course, platform and business. And so we have a way to host these things. But so I found myself a teacher, and suddenly I found myself having to go back and sort of forget all my privilege and advantages and think, well, how can I actually teach this to people so they too can get either a traditional book deal? It's not just about self-publishing, it's about both aspects. So they can get a book deal or self-publish a book in a way that is successful without having all the advantages I have. So that was another long answer. And the course, by the way, is closed. You can't, I'm not selling it. You can't join it even if you wanted to at this point. I may do it again if it's successful. I have no idea. I'm so bad at this. Like, I have nothing to sell apart from my book.
How many people did you get signed up for the course?
So we capped it at 25 because that's, I said, I'm meaningfully doing, like, to meaningfully do it with office hours where I can do one-on-ones with people and give them advice. I don't have the time or ability to do more than that. So we capped it at 25 and it's sold out. So
nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with it because it's so nice to hear other people's stories. And look, the fact is people who write books and who publish books, for the most part, are really nice people and are really kind and really grateful. And it's just the antithesis of what you see so much working in tech, honestly. I love it. I love being able to have honest, genuine, nice people who just want to put their art out into the world and being able to help them versus the pitches I get or I got as a journalist where it's just somebody's on the make and they just want you to promote their company so they can get rich. And it's like, but isn't your company going to kill a bunch of people? And they're like, well, we think very deeply about the health and safety aspects. So we'll definitely get to that. It's so nice working with writers, trust me. So yeah, I'm excited about it.
So you have the book coming out, you have the experience that you have several startup companies, you have the 8-week course that you are running through right now with 25 lucky authors. Those guys are super lucky.
They are so lucky. So lucky.
Yes.
It's
you
like
are
golden ticket.
It is a golden ticket, yes.
Augustus Gloop swimming in chocolate. Yeah. No,
I would do the course. I think they're very lucky.
No, they are. I'm sorry. I'm not. I'm British. I have a really hard time with the idea of both praise and sort of self-congratulations. So I have to deflect at every turn.
So I've also seen you have a great website. You have a great Twitter going. Twitter seems to be your main social media base from what I've seen. How would you give advice for authors that are trying to build an author platform, and how important do you think it is?
So this is a cliche, but authenticity is the only answer. So I've deleted my Twitter account so many times. I have about 11,000 followers, and about 10, 12 years ago, I had about 11,000 followers because I delete my Twitter account roughly every 6 months when I decide I hate it so much and it's toxic. And I always tell myself that this is for real this time, I'm deleting it. So I will delete it, not just close it, but full on delete it. So I lose all my followers. And then about 6 months later, I'm like, I need to weigh in on this. And so I re-register it. There's a video of me with Gary Vaynerchuk somewhere on CNN talk about how I will never be on Twitter again from about 12 years ago. So, my use of Twitter is different from other people. I'm quite self-destructive. But I will say authenticity. Everything you see on Twitter from me is how I genuinely sort of feel. And you'll see a mix of me going after tech awfulness, that I see every day, but also hopefully lifting up and elevating authors that I love. It kind of goes back to what I've said before about how I love authors as and writers as a counterbalance to the awfulness of technology. So my Twitter account is kind of this weird mix of, I just read this book and it's fantastic and you should buy it, and this company is terrible and it's going to destroy the world and I hate it and it should burn to the ground. So I think though what you get though is authenticity. It's like no one can say that was a PR'd sort of a PR strategy. And I think people like authenticity and choose your platform that you're best on. If you are good at pithy, succinct commentary and you don't mind getting into fights, Twitter. If you would rather not get into fights, Instagram, you have a nice garden. I recommend Instagram because you can put pictures of your books stacked up in your garden and people are going to love it. If you bake, Instagram. But again, authenticity. People like that. TikTok, if you are younger and smarter than I am, I think TikTok is fantastic. I don't understand. How do they do it? A guy turned into a pumpkin. I don't understand how he did it. It's amazing. It's like, I can't do that. I would be terrible on TikTok. But if that is your medium, then do it. And authenticity. Don't think of it as building an author platform because you will end up, I think, being quite cynical about it and being like, how can I get as many followers as possible? Or how can I say things that will make people want to buy my book? And I think the ones who are the most successful, in my opinion, are those who are just like, well, I want to be a good part of the community. I want to be a good literary citizen. I want to build up authors I love. And over time, those authors will get to know your stuff. And that means when you have a book out, you'll suddenly find really nice, impressive people retweeting your book announcements and things. So be nice, engage. And the other thing is engage with people. I engage with people to a fault. The Guardian once said about me, his Twitter fights are legendary, which if you ever want to reconsider where your life is going, have a national newspaper say your Twitter fights are legendary. But it's true.
I
It's like,
I would be proud of that. That's like a gold medal.
It's a badge of honor. No, but always, if you're going to have Twitter fights, punch up. That's my, don't punch down. But my genre of writing about tech awfulness sort of requires me to go after powerful people. Most people's doesn't. Most people's platform should be more about lifting up wonderful things or talking about the writing process. Whatever is your genre, your niche, that is what you should be authentically doing on social media. It's kind of not a very helpful answer, but if you attack social media cynically, you're not. It's not going to work. People can smell a phony a mile off.
I agree. Networking too, like you're talking about, engaging with people and engaging with people who are in the genre or the aspect of the industry that you're in and interested in.
Yeah, people are nice. I mean, publishing and writing is an incredibly. There are many problems with diversity and inclusion in every industry, and publishing is no different. But I will say, compared to other industries, publishing is more inclusive as a community, and you can and it's also flatter as a community. If I tweet about an amazing blockbuster author's book that I've enjoyed, there's a pretty decent chance they will respond to me. That's an amazing achievement of social media. That did not happen before. You couldn't write to. I mean, you could write to a superstar author, and maybe they'd see your note, and maybe they'd bother to write back, but the immediacy of me being able to say, I love, at so-and-so who is the #1 bestseller's book, and them saying, thank you. It's like, holy shit. Like, you can, by engaging with people, build a really decent community of people around you without too much difficulty. If you take the time and actually give a shit. Don't bullshit people. Don't do it clearly to get followers, because that won't work.
I love your platform. I love your message. I feel like you are a journalist at heart so much. My inner journalism just squeals with happiness. But that leads me to the question of what's next. Do you want to write another murder mystery? Are you going to stick with fiction? How are you feeling about the future?
Oh yeah, I'm so tired of journalism. I'll tell you, and the reason is because it doesn't make a difference anymore. So when I started out as a journalist writing about tech, when I very first started out, people didn't really understand the internet. People were very dismissive of it. People thought blogging was a flash in the pan. And now, of course, people are leaving the New York Times to become bloggers. But it wasn't. The internet was treated as almost a joke, and it was nerdy. And so my first intent as a journalist was to tell people, this thing is important. It is coming. This is what's going to happen. My second sort of act as a journalist was to say, this shit is dangerous. This thing that is amazing and interesting has been co-opted by bad people or people who are not thinking about the consequences. And I spent a lot of time having people say, no, it's not. It's great. It's unequivocally good that we now have, the disruption is good. And so I was able as a journalist to change people's minds and to say, no, trust me, as a person who literally hosted the startup contest that made these companies their first check. Trust me when I say that they are dangerous. And people paid attention, and investors acted on my journalism and didn't invest in people who were sociopaths. And it was nice. We are now in a third act of the internet where people know it's terrible and they don't care. And we have all these people saying, well, Facebook is targeting pre-teenagers with body image issues and making them worse. They are fomenting coups. They are, we sort of all sit and nod along at this. And I don't mean to say we shouldn't. Sorry, I'm actually like I'm saying that nodding is bad. What I mean is we all know this, but there is no option for us to not be. I mean, I'm not on Facebook, but there is no option for most people to not be on this. It is part of their job to be on these things. It is part of their social life. If you're a teenager saying, "Oh, I'm not going to be on social media," it's like saying, "I'm not going to have friends." Like, isn't it just as damaging to teenagers to be not on social media because they can't engage with their friend group? We are in such an abusive relationship with technology in the tech industry, and there's nothing we can do about it. So as a journalist saying, this is bad, Uber is a horrible company, and people go, I know, anyway, I'm going to book an Uber. It's like, as a journalist, it's incredibly pointless at this point, and I'm sure people in politics feel the same way. We're all so tribal about stuff that that what's the point of as a journalist? You're the type of journalist I was, which is one who wanted to warn people about terrible things and have them change their behaviors accordingly or try and make a difference. So for me, fiction was a way of the suspension of disbelief thing, of saying, I want to tell you about how this stuff really is without your guard coming up, without you thinking that I'm trying to change your mind or that I'm trying to lecture you on how bad things are. I want you to understand this, and I want you to perhaps think a little bit about some of these issues or see how bad it can be without feeling like you have to argue back. And one of the wonderful, and I also want to tell it from the standpoint of, we make these people caricatures. We make Mark Zuckerberg a caricature. We make, Peter Thiel or whoever caricatures, and they're not. They're really complex and interesting. Doesn't mean they're good, but it helps to understand them. It helps to understand why these people are starting these companies. And fiction is the best way to understand people and the world, way better than journalism. And people will read it and enjoy it and then walk away going, that's interesting. And it will sit in their brain in a way that being lectured at by a person on CNN just doesn't, because you go, well, obviously they'd say that. So no, I'm never going back to journalism. I find it just, and everybody's an opinion columnist now. I want to do things that other people aren't doing or that are hard. And having a Substack where you yell at the world is the easiest thing in the world right now. And so, yeah, I love fiction. It allows me to escape from all the horrors of the world. And no, I'm never going back. And the question is, am I ever going back to traditional publishing? And I don't know about that either, because my experience publishing my own book has been such a joy and so unfrustrating that I think we are going to see a golden age of indie publishing coming, because I think as more and more people, more and more platforms and tools come along that make it easier, the idea of putting yourself through that horror show of being told by person after person after person that your work isn't good enough or it's not quite right for me. Well, who are you? And I mean that with love to agents and publishers, and I think I love them. I think they're phenomenal and they work so hard and they get so many great books out into the world, but they also, by definition, can't get so many great books out into the world. Yep. And it shouldn't be their decision that something doesn't get published. So for me, it's like, I'll let the people who don't have the privilege and resources that I have get the book deals because they need them and they deserve them. And then people like me who can do it on my own, but I feel like I kind of have a moral obligation to get out the way and do my thing over here. And hopefully, though, encourage others to try it if they have been frustrated by publishing, etc. And that was a long and weird answer.
No, I love it because it's perfect. What I want to talk about is it is super hard when you're going the traditional publishing route. As someone who has tried, who has books I've got like over 70 rejections on, it's demoralizing. And there's so many factors in why you get a rejection. And so I would I know there's a lot of listeners out there like me who have gone this path. And a lot of times there's this unspoken belief that self-publishing is just for the people who are rejected from traditional publishing or not good enough. And I'm hoping you can kick this thought to the
No, I 100% can. And I can do it through experience, not just through, I feel like all self-published authors feel like they need to say it's a better way to do it because there is so much stigma, has been so much stigma around it. It's like, no, I think it's great. I have seen the internet industry from scratch, or at least the sort of web industry from scratch. And I remember very vividly when blogging first became a thing, like even before it was called blogging. And it was dismissed as a joke by real journalists. It was the thing that you did if you weren't good enough to write for a newspaper. It was the thing you did if you were a nut job who wanted to just get their crazed conspiracy theories out into the world. None of that was true, obviously, but it was the stigma, because people obviously want to say that because they are professionals and you are an amateur. And you look at where we are, and it's that old thing of first they ignore you, then they mock you, then they fear you, then in this case, then they want to be you. Because what's happened over the years with blogging is it's gone from being a joke to a threat to now all these journalists at the New York Times and other publications are jumping ship to desperately become Substackers and whatever else, because it's not just legit, but it's also you make more money that way, you get more impact, more attention that way. It is just one of those things, unfortunately, when something comes along that is accessible to all, by definition, you're going to get a pile of shit as well as some gold. It's just because that's the thing about, it's like the thing about democracy. It's not perfect, but it's at least, democratic in theory. And a lot of self-published books are, in theory, I know it's a whole other podcast, but the point is, it's the best system we have out of all the other bad ones. But it's true that a lot of self-published books are fucking terrible. And so it's easy to point at those and say, well, self-publishing's crap. As the tools, though, for accessing editors, things like Readsy and many other platforms where you can find editors, you can find cover designers. There are forums and communities where people can teach you how to make a good product. There's just and people, thanks to Amazon and other, Ingram Spark and all that stuff, can produce a higher quality product and actually make money from this stuff. Much like with blogging, which went through that same journey, as the tools got better, as the advice got better, as the community got stronger, so the quality improved. There's a whole generation growing up now who don't even understand the distinction between a traditionally published book and a self-published book. Who the fuck knows what an imprint is who isn't in publishing? The idea you hold two books that look exactly the same up side by side and people go, well, that's a Penguin Random House book. Show me the 15-year-old on TikTok who knows what the fuck the difference between it. They don't care. And I don't mean that they're stupid. I mean, it's irrelevant. If it's good and interesting, they're reading it on their phone. Much like with blogging, where the distinction became irrelevant because people were forwarding a link around, and it didn't matter if it was on The Guardian or on something that looked a bit like a newspaper, but was actually some guy's blog. We're getting to a point where it's irrelevant. And I think we will then get to the next great point, which is where people who are traditionally published are like, this is stupid. I'm doing all the work of promoting my own book anyway. The people buying the book on my platform anyway, I know more about the audience than the editors do. And I can do this a lot quicker. And publishers are going to be faced with the challenge that newspapers and magazines have had is, do we try to match that authenticity and efficiency and speed and get books out quicker and more diverse books? And we're seeing some of that where they're trying to do, ebook only books. They can do more and they can do them a bit quicker. Do we change our structures in order to make self-publishing less appealing to people because traditional publishing is more accessible? Or do we not, and do we accept that we're just going to publish a certain number of things, but then we're going to try and make them look a bit more self-published, a bit more authentic and indie, which is what we saw with blogging. When newspapers started having bloggers, they started doing live blogs. And we're now seeing the New York Times try to do Substack, basically, where they're like, we're going to pay journalists so they don't leave the New York Times and other publications. We're going to have these paid newsletters we're going to do and these things to keep them on board. This news company, Puck, just launched, which is a series of paid email newsletters gathered together under a sort of venture-funded, venture-backed publication, because people recognize that if you don't try and match what blogging and email newsletters are doing, they will leave and go do their own one. So, and I think that's what we're seeing with the beginnings of self-publishing. The tools are there, the skills are there, the writers are there, the audience is there. So at some point, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want that freedom? Why wouldn't you want that that long tail? Why wouldn't you want all the rest of it that comes with self-publishing? So I'm hugely optimistic based on I've seen this with blogging. I've seen this with YouTube videos. YouTube stars get more views than a lot of network television. Why the fuck would a YouTube star give up that platform to be just on television when half their audience will never see them? The internet changes stuff for good or ill, and publishing has been the last to change. Partly because people in tech don't read books, and so therefore they don't want to. Their dream is not to create a disruptive publishing platform. It's to create film or music or whatever startups. Publishing is, naturally has longer lead times. Also, Amazon is such a monopoly that it's hard. But these are just obstacles that eventually technology will subvert, and self-publishing will become the way that people publish, in my humble opinion.
No, I think your humble opinion has some experience to back it.
I've seen it happen. And I've seen people at the point where people had to apologize for being bloggers. Oh, what do you write for? Oh, well, I just blog. Oh. And you couldn't, as a blogger, get into, it was a joke. Even when BuzzFeed said that one day they would have a White House correspondent, everybody laughed. You're just a blog. What the fuck? You're not going to be in the White House. Now, now Ben Smith, the former editor of BuzzFeed, is the media editor of the New York Times. There is no distinction anymore between a blogger and a journalist. And if there is, the bloggers win. And it's going to be the same with publishing. I'm certain of that. It's just a question of how quickly it happens.
There was one thing that you said in that Readsy interview that I was curious more details on. You are projected to make more money from your self-published novel than any of your traditional novels. Is that correct?
So obviously, we'll see how the sales figures do. But in terms of pre-sales and in terms of how the book is currently doing, it is doing better than, and we're recording this before the book's out, I should sort of say again. So, there's a lot still to go. But in terms of the amount of pre-sales I've got, in terms of just the general as well, but it's not just sales that's important. Excuse me, in terms of the reviews, in terms of the buzz, in terms of the everything. This is shaping up to be more successful. I'm getting more interest in sales for everything for this than I did with any previous book. So we'll see if that continues. But certainly there is no aspect of this thus far that has been anything other than better than my publishing experience, except it's cost me a lot more money, obviously.
And that's a factor in it. Obviously, you've spoken of having the privilege to put the money behind it. But I just think it's an interesting point to look at. I think there's a lot of belief sometimes that you can't do it as well as traditional publishers, or you can't do it at their level. And I think you're proving that to be not true.
Yeah, and I think part of it is I used to be a publisher, and to find good editors, to find good cover designers and the rest of it, you used to have to know people in publishing because it was a closed shop almost. Now, thanks to things like Reedsy and the rest of them, and I keep saying Reedsy only because it's the one I use. There are many others. I have no skin in the game to say use Reedsy, but in terms of those platforms now allow you to find literally the same editors who would work on your book at a lot of publishers. A lot of these people work as freelance designers, for example, for, I mentioned Penguin Random House, and also they're on Reedsy. You can hire the exact same people. You can hire the same editors. A lot of the editors you'll see on places like Reedsy say, I used to work at HarperCollins. The person recording my audiobook has recorded more than 100 audiobooks for HarperCollins. Like, the exact same talent is available. The knowledge that used to be this closed shop of you didn't know how to get a book from manuscript to finished copies is all available thanks to the internet. Thanks to things like Ingram Spark is remarkable in its quality of hardcovers, to the point where I hold up on the course. There's a copy of my current book with a copy of the trade paperback of my last book. And I'm sorry, the difference is night and day. Ingram's looks better. And my trade paperback that I hold up next to it was published by a big 5 publisher. There's the publicity that's available. The publicists are available to you. If you do your own publicity, if you do your own social media campaigns, everything else, every author who's been traditionally published tells you of the frustration of after the first week, suddenly your publicist disappears off the bat, because they've moved on to the next. And unless your book is a bestseller or you've been paid a $200,000 plus advance, you're old news after the first couple of weeks. Not if you're doing it yourself, you're not. And you don't have to ask permission from a publisher to do something. You can do an event. You can put pages out for free. You can do all these wonderful things that your publisher will go, well, we'd rather you didn't do that because we've got this other thing. Nice thing about traditionally publishing is you can put the book out in multiple markets at the same time. What the living fuck is wrong with publishing that I can see a book written, a book reviewed that's come out in the UK, where I used to live, obviously, and I think that's amazing. And I go to Amazon and it says coming March 2023. It's over there. I could go get it. What do you mean? But it's obviously, and I know I'm not stupid. I know rights sales and I know territories, but that's not. But what is stupid is rights sales and territories in a modern world. I remember when Line of Duty, that British cop show, was out. I'm watching on Twitter as people post fucking spoilers about a show that's out in the UK. And they're like, I didn't see that twist coming. It's like, I can't watch this until next month, you assholes. But publishing, but it's ridiculous. Why is this book not out in all English-speaking territories at the same time? You don't have to translate anything. Why do American publishers, this is my bugbear, insist on changing the names of British books to make them more accessible to Americans? Americans are not stupid. Sophie Hannah had this amazing book called Haven't They Grown? I don't know if you've read it, which is, it's got this amazing hook, which is somebody runs into the person they knew 20 years ago or 10, 15 years ago, who they knew and were estranged from, who had this young family, and they run into them and their children have not aged. It's wonderful. And they see this person, they're like, their children haven't aged a day over 15 years. And the British title is Haven't They Grown? And it's so perfect. And, or is it Why Haven't They Grown? It doesn't matter. And the American publishers changed it to something like Perfect Little Children or something. And it's like, what is wrong with you? You had a perfect pun. You had an amazing time. Anyway, the point is, you as the author can publish it with the same brilliant name, the same wonderful cover, the same time. As a self-publisher, as traditional publishing, you have to beg and plead with your publisher to make good decisions, because they'll always say, and this is someone who's published more than 12 books traditionally. I love traditional publishers, but having to beg to somebody to go to the marketing team or the sales team and plead with them that you know your audience better than they do. It's a losing start. It's a losing battle. So I don't know. I can't even remember the question. I'm so annoyed at publishing at this. It's
No.
But there's so many benefits to doing it yourself. Even if you don't have money and resources, just the freedom to say it's on Amazon UK and US or Bookshop in both territories and in Canada and Australia at the same time. Publishing, fix that, or every author will just bail on you eventually, because we live in a world where Twitter is available in different countries. I want to buy your book and I can't.
I think it's important to factor too that you spend time knowing this stuff, though. You research what's going on. You're ambitious enough to follow through. And I think that's also a difference. And if you're going the self-publishing route, expect work. Expect there's a lot to do. Yeah, a lot of research.
Take it seriously. Everyone I know who's successful in any endeavor takes it really seriously and is a professional and learns everything there is to know about it. And that doesn't mean go to a fancy school. I didn't go to publishing school. I don't even know what that is. But I spent years, because I love publishing and I love books, learning everything there is to know about it. That information is out there for anybody, and you do it through trial and error, or you do it through reading a lot. Yeah, it is not easy. And even if you can do it in a way that isn't expensive, it is a lot of your time, and you have to know what you're doing, and you have to care. You have to really care about making something that is as good as you could do it. The same is true in Silicon Valley, where in theory, anybody can launch a website, but the people I know who are the most successful, they live and breathe this stuff. They are obsessed with making it better and better every day. They make a product, a company, a platform, whatever it is, an app, and every day they're obsessing about, they're listening to users, and the equivalent for publishers and authors is listening to readers, reading everything you can possibly read in your genre because you love it, not because it's work. And if you don't love it, don't do it, because it is fucking hard. And no, everyone uses this analogy. I'm going on a tangent, but I don't care. Sorry. But because it's a thing that people say, oh, my book is my baby, and I have never given birth to a child, so I'm always uncomfortable with the analogy because I don't understand it well enough. But this idea of your book is your baby, I understand where that comes from. But the thing about a baby is when you take a baby out into the world to show it to people, they generally don't give it a bad review. Similarly, when you pitch you give birth, and when you're walking out of the hospital with your baby, there isn't an agent standing there going, thank you for showing me your baby. There's a lot to like about it. There is. But it's not really for me. I just don't think I can give it its best shot in the market. So we're just going to put it in a box. And that's the end of that. But do come back to me if you ever have another baby. I'd love to see more babies from you. It's such a fucking brutal, horrible, mean world out there. Not because people want to be mean or weird, but just because that's the nature of it. And then you put your baby out to the world. The agent likes it. Find a publisher who doesn't hate your ugly baby. And then, and then they go, we love it, but we want to change it a little bit. We wonder if we could change the name and give it a slightly different face. Then they put it out in the world, and then readers get to judge it with stars. 1 star, didn't finish looking at baby. Couldn't. I just put it down after a while. It was just it's so brutal that if you don't love it, if you don't love your own baby and other people's babies and the idea of babies, then you're just going to spend your entire life crying in a corner. It's such a hard, cruel business. And as it should be, because you're expecting people to buy a book and to dedicate 10, 12 more hours of their life reading this thing. Mm-hmm. They're entitled to their opinion. Criticism is important, but my God, it's horrible on the other end. So if you don't love it, and then you'll sell 10 copies, it's so brutal. So if you don't love it, don't do it.
Clearly you have a passion for the industry and for publishing and stories in general, but I also wonder how much of your passion for your theme and message, because you seem to have a pretty strong theme and message in your writing. How much of that do you think motivates you on low days?
It's such a challenge with authors where they have to be 2 people at the same time. They have to be passionate about what it is they're writing and put it all into their work, but then they have to be passionate about the business of being an author. And you have to be really passionate about both, because you can't write the thing without being passionate about the work and the craft of writing, and you can't sell the thing and get readers without being passionate about the craft of publishing. I live and think and breathe, and I'm lucky there's overlap with my world, right? Because a lot of the challenges facing publishing are also about technology. A lot of the promotional aspects of publishing are involved social media. So there's a lot of overlap between my passion about tech awfulness and my passion for publishing. But yeah, you have to be first and foremost obsessed with your writing, and with writing if you're nonfiction, your topic. If you are writing fiction, with your craft and your work. That's first and foremost. You can't do it without that. And it's to use the Silicon Valley analogy, and I see this every day, where people have to be both passionate about the quote unquote problem their company is trying to solve. They have to be passionate about food delivery or whatever it is, while at the same time having a totally separate persona who is about raising capital and is about knowing about corporate law and all that stuff. Art and commerce and creativity and commerce are these sort of inextricably wedded thing if you want to be a quote unquote successful author. But you can choose to not publish your book at all, in which case all you need to be obsessed is about your work. But if you're not obsessed about your work, you cannot be anything, because you can't promote or market or sell something that you haven't written well. So yeah, so I'm lucky that I started out as somebody who cared a great deal about technology and about trying to, point out the bad pieces of it and make it a bit better. And it helps I can also write. So we combine those two, and then I learned about publishing, and now I have it all. Lucky me.
Yes.
I can be frustrated from a number of angles at all given times.
He won the whole chocolate factory.
Constantly despairing. It's like people who write about politics and write, it's like, great, I'm despairing about publishing and book sales and the end of the world, all at the same time. Hooray.
Hooray. Good job.
So in this pursuit to be passionate about storytelling and about the industry and everything, can you give me, for listeners, some book recommendations, some for a passion for storytelling, some of your favorite mysteries, and also some craft books that you would recommend? Craft
books in terms of ones that I've read to learn the craft, or as in literally like Save the Cat for movie writing, like
anything and all. There's no wrong answer.
Yeah, because I've said before, I'm not good at reading. I mean, I recommend Lisa Cron's Wired for Story to everyone I meet, and Story or Die. She has a number of different ones, because she's really good on this idea of how the human brain, her whole thesis, and it's exactly right, is that there's a reason why, going back to sort of Neolithic times, cavemen sitting in caves and cave women presumably sitting in caves were painting stories on the wall at a time when anything that wasn't about survival you just didn't do, because you had to be focused on finding food, finding warmth, finding shelter. So why were they telling stories at the same time? Why were they doing what is essentially entertainment? And the answer is because storytelling is this incredible survival tool where it allows you to essentially run simulations of danger through your head and understand what you would do in those situations. So the idea of storytelling is just this core thing to humanity, as important as food and warmth and survival and reproduction and the rest of it, is so fascinating, because it also then, as a storyteller, makes it important to learn how the human brain processes stories, why we are drawn to a good story, why we want to tell a good story, and why a bad story is so unsatisfying, why we throw a book at the wall when we're angry at it. Like, it's such a visceral anger. This is fucking shit book, The answer is because it's so built into us as humans, the storytelling. And she's just so good on that. And if you read that, you understand fundamentally how to write a satisfying story that can, I've talked before about changing people's minds, as well as, I don't buy that bullshit of, if you want to send a message, use Western Union. No, if you want to send a message, write fiction, because people will listen to it in a way and absorb it. We've all walked out of a movie or finished a book feeling like a different human being, feeling like a better version of ourselves, because we have just run through an entire moral simulation. So Lisa Cron's books, recommend highly. Beyond that, though, read books that you love, because that will inspire you to write better. Like I love Agatha Christie books. I think she's a brilliant writer. People don't give her enough credit for being a brilliant writer, as well as being a brilliant plot creator. I love Ruth Ware's books. I love Sophie Hannah's books. All these people who are amazing writers, but also brilliant at telling these complex stories. I love going back into the golden age of fiction. I'm obsessed with golden age fiction, particularly locked room stuff. And again, I mean locked room, I mean that crime couldn't have existed. Those books I just find wonderful because the genius it requires for a John Dixon Carr or an Edmund Crispin to write. Like Edmund Crispin's The Disappearing Toyshop is the Moving Toyshop, sorry, is so wonderful. It's, a guy who goes to sleep in a toy shop, wakes up and there's a corpse. He goes to get help, and when he comes back, the shop has disappeared. It's the most wonderful concept for a book, and his writing is also funny. So Ruth Wara, Sophie Hannah, Kathy Wang just wrote a book called Imposter Syndrome, where the plot is basically what if a person who is basically Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook was actually a Russian spy. And it's so wonderful because you end up going, yeah, she probably is. Or at least somebody is there. It's so, but again, I don't think she is. I think somebody at Facebook is, but I don't think it's Sheryl Sandberg. But, so she's amazing. God, I have so many because I just read everything.
Well, I also would like to know if you have any recommendations for the industry side of it, because you treat self-publishing as a startup company. People who don't have the experience that you do, what books would you recommend?
On learning self-publishing?
And learning startup business in general.
Oh, okay. So learning startup business generally. Wow, that's a great question. So, obviously I've read a lot of tech startup books. There are lots of books that are, will teach you how to do a startup, like in Gary Vaynerchuk, like Crush It and all these things. They're all great if you're a fucking rich white dude like Gary Vaynerchuk, who I love, great human being. He inherited a business. That's not what do you tell people? First, inherit a business. Then, there's a lot of these startup books that are really be a white guy, come to Silicon Valley and get away with it. Like, great. I think for me, again, the truth is in fiction. I would recommend, and I'm blanking on the author's name, which is terrible, but her book is called Startup Wife. Tahmima, what is her name? Anyway, sorry, it's terrible. I've forgotten her name. But it's called The Startup Wife.
I'll look it up and have it in the notes for the episode for them.
I'm so bad with names. It's a crime. Anyway, but it's called The Startup Wife. It is such a brilliant book on a woman who is trying to raise venture capital for her company, and she and she basically has to recruit her male, obviously boyfriend, to be the face of the company because that's the best way for her to raise money. But then he ends up being sort of deified as this god, and she ends up getting forgotten. It's such a perfect summary of how it works too often in Silicon Valley. Kathy Wang's book, Imposter Syndrome, gives you a great understanding of Silicon Valley. There are a lot of really, really good books on understanding how. Tahmima Anam, thank you, Poppy just messaged me. Yes, Tahmima Anam, or Anam. She'll probably tell me I'm pronouncing it wrong, but her book is fucking delightful. So what else? Goodness. Any fiction that's written by somebody who knows Silicon Valley and has decided to go to fiction, I somewhat self-interestedly recommend, because they're probably telling you all the stuff they can't write in nonfiction because publishers won't let them. Another sort of self-interested plug, my girlfriend Sarah's book, A Uterus is a Feature, Not a Bug, is a book about being a working mom and how that makes you stronger in the workplace.
That's a fantastic title, by the way.
That is a fantastic title.
It's a wonderful title. It is such a good title, but it speaks to the idea of people say in Silicon Valley that something is something that seems like a mistake is actually a deliberate. It's like on Twitter, arguments look like they're a bug, like having hot, toxic people on Twitter, but it's not. It's a feature. They want arguments because it means you stick around. So her idea of this idea of being a mother, which people consider a disadvantage, is actually so often an advantage of what it teaches you. Her book, though, also gets into how she and our family generally were threatened by Uber with $1 million campaign to destroy her because she was a woman. They thought they could, because she was writing critically about the company. So it teaches you the reality of how these companies operate, but also how she built a company despite all that, using the tools that being a mother had given her. And it's also, for those who aren't mothers, it's also a book about using the things that being a woman in the world teach you to do a startup, and it's applicable, I think, to women, people of color, and other sort of underrepresented groups. So those are good. I shy away from any book that's about how to do a company. There are good ones on like how to structure a business and how to register an LLC, but anything that purports to tell you how to make $1 million as an author. Similarly, self-publishing books, there's so many of them. You can read them all because they're all free on Amazon for the most part. But your mileage will vary on those. They're very good on the how somebody did it and how you're supposed to do it. But you really have to follow your heart on this stuff and do it the way your book should be done. A lot of books on self-publishing assume you're going to write a series of 55 novels. It's like you're going to write millions of crime novels every year or thousands of romance novels every year, which is great and amazing, and I couldn't do it. That's a lot of work. But they weren't necessarily applicable to me, who wanted to write one book and then about 4 years from now I'll write another one. The idea of like, give away the first book in your series and then, well, this is the only book in my series, so I'm not going to do that. So a long rambling answer, but again, read everything. Read everything. You will, if you're obsessed with this stuff, you will read everything. If you're obsessed with startups, you will read everything. If you're obsessed with Silicon Valley, you'll read everything. But I will say the fiction about Silicon Valley that is the best. And I'm not saying this just to like score, #feminist points. I hate men who are like, I recommend women. But I will say, as an objective fact, all of the best books on Silicon Valley are written by women because they see all of it and understand the bad as well as the good, or people of color. Anyone who's not a cisgender white man telling you how to do a startup is inherently going to give you a better picture because they've actually had the shit kicked out of them. And that tells you how to do it more than a guy going, well, I inherited my parents' wine business and then I decided to go onto social media and I'm suddenly a millionaire. Well done you. Tell us your secrets. Sorry, anyway, that was a long
that's good. And
wonderful.
Not just books, but also websites, podcasts, bloggers, any of those that you would recommend.
I'm not very good on bloggers, but I will say podcasts. I love The Shit People Don't Tell You About Writing, which is Bianca Murray's podcast, where she has two agents on every week, and they go through a query letter from a real author and decide if it's a dog is about to run in, by the way, if you hear squeaking and barking. So that's going to be a soundtrack for the rest of this podcast. So the Shit No One Tells You About Writing is a fantastic podcast if you're trying to get a traditional book deal. Writer's Routine I really enjoy because I'm a nerd about writing, which is a podcast about, as it sounds, writers' routines, and it just makes you feel you're not alone because a lot of it's about the struggle of getting those words down. And the author, Dan Simpson, is really tremendously likable. I like podcasts about books. I'm not good on the ones about publishing. I like, things like Bookworm I enjoy just for the sort of Michael Silverblatt's laconic talking about literary fiction that I don't understand. I enjoy that a great deal because it gives me something to aspire to one day, being on Michael Silverblatt's podcast, so he can slowly ask me about the scene where people eat a ham in my book and whether that was an analogy for my own sisters. I don't know. It's so weird. So I love that. So tell me about this ham. It's like... so I love that. I don't know. I listen to everything is my recommendation, except bloggers. That's weird. I don't know many. I don't read many writing blogs. I wonder why that is. Oh God, I recommended books and I didn't mention Margaret Atwood. Read everything by Margaret Atwood if you want to learn how to write. My God, and tell a story that's both brilliantly written and wonderful and warns you about the end of the world. Like my God. But that's like recommending, if you like food, you're going to love steak. It's like stupid, but Margaret Atwood is the genius, obviously.
She's fantastic.
Agreed.
All right. So we have we're at the end here of this interview, and we have kind of a signature question that we ask everyone at the end. And I wanted to ask you if you had a metaphor that describes your journey through writing, what metaphor would it be?
My journey through writing, as in producing a book, or my writing career?
There is no wrong answer, however you perceive it.
A metaphor, my God, like a man constantly punching himself in the face while stepping on a rake and falling down a hole. I mean, I don't know what that is. Punching myself in the face harder than I punch anyone else in the face. I don't know. The only metaphor I can think of is this sort of a friend of mine and somebody who used to work for me, Lee Cowart, just wrote a book called Hurt So Good, which is a nonfiction book about the science of pain and why human beings enjoy pain. And obviously there's some sort of sadomasochist aspect to it, but also why do people love hot sauce so much? Why do people love running ultra marathons? And it's so interesting as a metaphor for writing, because it is this, like, why the fuck do we do it? It is, have you ever met, it's like living in New York. With all love to people who live in New York, all I ever hear them say is the reason it's so wonderful is because it's so hard. Like, people are rude to you, and the weather is weird, and the apartments are expensive. It's the best city on earth. And I feel like it's the same with writing. It's people. So New York, that's it. New York is my metaphor. Because people who love it, everything they love about it is so hard and so terrible and so weird. It's like, oh yes, I love New York. You'll walk down the street and someone will punch you in the face and charge you $10,000 for a studio apartment. My God, I love it. And and for me, it's the same. It's like publishing, where you have to sit down every day, pour your heart out onto a piece of paper, realize it's crap, do it all over again. What other industry is there where you love something so much that you don't want to do it every day? Like, I love this so much, but I'm going to tidy my desk before I do it. Like, do you think Michael Phelps, before he gets in the pool, tidies his kitchen first because he hates water so much? But this is what writers do. We're like, it's hard. And then we work and we write a book, and then people punch us in the face and tell us it's crap. And then, social media tells us all the mistakes we made. Agents tell us our baby is ugly. They tell us that actually, it's just not for me, but good luck. After 50 weeks, then it goes out into the world. No one cares about it. And you have to do it all over again. And we go, I love being an author. Like, that to me is the analogy. It's like living in New York if New York was constantly on fire, and then every day somebody came to your door, rang on it, opened it, and said, everything you do is terrible, and then slammed it on you again. And then the next morning you woke up and went, let's do New York again. That's publishing, and I fucking love it, and it's wonderful, and everyone who writes a book is the best person in the world, and I wouldn't want to do anything else. But my God. Like, because I get to do fun stuff like this. I love, this is the best, this is the fun part. And it maybe makes up for the terribleness. I don't know, but even the terribleness, like Lee says in her book, even somehow the terribleness, it like, why do we bite on a toothache? Like, we obviously enjoy it at some fundamental level, this pouring of our soul out and having people punch us in the face and tell us we're not good enough, try again.
Well,
that was fantastic.
I'm gonna
was that a feel good enough ending for you?
Well,
feel good.
Actually, it's perfect because I did want to end with your book 1414 is out, and all of the listeners who, if you really got excited about Paul's passion and his energy and his intellect and how he speaks and how he goes about looking at things in his perspective. I haven't read the book, but I've read his blogs. I went and researched him. His writing is just like how he's speaking. It's got that same passion. It's got that same critical view where he takes the time and what he's looking at. So I am really, really excited to go get 1414.
I will say, I'm remiss in not sending you a copy. I'm so sorry. It's we're recording this before it's out. I'm so bad at this shit. It's
okay. I'm gonna go get it. It's all
no,
good.
You're not. After we finish this, I'm sending you both an EPUB of it, because this is how bad I am as an author. If you're going to be on a podcast, authors, send the host a copy of your fucking book, you idiot. But if you do like my voice, I think you'll probably like the writing in the book, because although the characters in it are not me, they share some of my worldview at times. So hopefully you check out the book and don't hate it. And if you hated listening to me, do not, I beg you, buy my book, because you're going to fucking hate it so much.
It's not for you.
It's not for you.
But if you
good
love
luck
this
with
podcast,
it, but it's not for me.
Go get it. Go get it. Go get it.
Absolutely, go get it.
All right. And per usual, all of Paul's information, his website, his Twitter account, we'll have a link to go get his book, will all be in the episode description, along with all of the amazing books that he listed. I'll have all of those there as well, so you guys don't worry about rewinding and going back to get the names of those authors and titles. Poppy and I got you. We got it. All right.
Amazing.
Thank
you guys so much. This was so much
Thank
fun.
you.
And subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to this.
Thank you.
More people should listen. The whole world should. That's my podcast recommendation. This podcast.
Oh,
Fantastic.
Hey, that's so sweet.
Wow.
Well, thank you. It has been
right.
wonderful, enlightening. I have truly appreciated and enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. It's been fantastic. Thank you, Cass. Thank you, Poppy.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. And if you liked this episode, please subscribe and give us that clickable 5-star love.
Got writer questions or feedback? Reach out through our website. And until next time, make sure to punch the keys.